All right, today we're going to talk about Lazarus. John 11, 1 through 44. John 11, 1 through 44. Lazarus. Here we go. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary's sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. If you want to check that out, that's in Luke 7:38 and also in John 12:3. But that's not really relevant to this story. If you just want to look at that, fine, there they are. Verse 3. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but the disciples thought that he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Real encouraging, real helpful there. Mr. Debbie Downer of the group.
Is that Doubting Thomas?
Yes. Tyler was later nicknamed, but this isn't the occasion where he got that nickname, but it contributed to the fact that he did get that nickname. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now, Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord. They replied. Jesus wept. Verse 35, there's always funny to me. That's always one of the memory verses that people do when they have to do a memory. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. So if you've got to memorize 10 verses, it's usually one that you pick just because it's the shortest one. So everybody knows John 11:35. I don't want to detract from what it's saying there, but that's one of the things about John 11:35. 36. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Okay, let's go back and go through this in a little more detail now that we've got the whole story and the whole context for it. But as we go through this is kind of important. Don't read it as if you already know the end of the story. So put yourself in the midst of it just as they were living it, and you don't know the outcome. You don't know how it ends. Try to imagine yourself in that same place and experience it the same way that they would have experienced it while they're going through it. Okay, verse 4. So they send messengers to Jesus saying, the one that you love is dead. Verse 4. When Jesus got the message, he said, this sickness is not fatal. It will become an occasion to show God's glory by glorifying God's Son. The voice says, his sickness will not end in death, but it will bring great glory to God. As these events unfold, the Son of God will be exalted. Now notice what Jesus said here. This sickness will not end in death. Or the first one, this sickness is not fatal. Yet, Lazarus died. The next thing that happened in this story was Lazarus died. Wait a minute, Jesus just said it's not fatal, or it will not end in death, but he dies. Was Jesus wrong? Okay, look at the second one more than the first. This sickness will not end in death. The end outcome is not going to be death. Did he die? Yes. Was that the end of the story? No. So Jesus was absolutely right in what he said. But this is one of those things where we would misinterpret what he said if you're in the midst of the story rather than having read the end of the story. Jesus didn't say that he wouldn't die. He just said the final conclusion of this particular account is not going to be death. It doesn't mean death wasn't a stopping point along the way to that place where this thing wouldn't kill him. Eventually, Lazarus did die for good. But it was not this sickness that ultimately took him out. Okay, this sickness will bring great glory to God or will become an occasion to show God's glory. At this point in the story, okay, remember that Jesus had just got the message, your friend is sick. And I guess he perceived that he's near the point of death, or maybe that was part of the message. I don't know. At this point in the story, Lazarus was seriously sick already. Now I've got to ask you, has God been glorified yet? All that Jesus knows or says is Lazarus is very sick, close to death, come help him. There's no glory yet. God has not been glorified by this occasion at all. When does God get glory? At the very end of the story, when Lazarus is no longer dead from this sickness, when it doesn't end in his death. But some people would have the attitude of, well, we're just praising the Lord right now because Lazarus is sick. It's messed up. You can't do that. You can't say the sickness brings any glory to God. It doesn't. The first death, it didn't bring any glory to God. It doesn't. God hasn't changed. Him being sick is just such a blessing. That's crazy. It doesn't even make sense. And yet that's how some people think. That's how some people reflect this whole idea of God trying to teach you something, God trying to do something with the sickness. God's getting glory with the sickness. No, he doesn't. He gets glory with the healing, with the answer, with the end of the sickness. Okay, as these events unfold, this story isn't nearly as good without some challenges along the way. Have you ever seen a movie? And in the movie, from beginning to end, you just say, okay, now the good guys got to go do this and go do this and go do this and go do this, and everything just falls into place. Is that a good movie? What happens to make it a good movie? There's got to be something that he's got to overcome. There's got to be something he's got to fight through. Something in his plan didn't work out like he thought. And the biggest.
If it worked out like you said, it would just be a very boring movie because
right.
You know exactly what the outcome is.
Correct. So as these events unfold, should we be surprised when our faith journey has some difficulties along the way?
No,
we don't like the inconvenience of the difficulties.
Right. And that's exactly the way it's perceived too, as inconvenience, and how much we dislike inconvenience when that's all that it is.
That's good. Yeah. So we got to get to the place where we realize, okay, I'm on a faith journey. And for this faith journey to be a good story for somebody else, there are going to be some difficulties along the way. It's not going to go smoothly from point A to point B.
The likelihood of having difficulties is very high, but it doesn't always have to be difficult.
Correct. Yeah. I'm not.
Sometimes it is a surprisingly smooth road, and you're kind of surprised on how well it went. I don't know. Yeah.
And with that said, it still should never surprise us if it doesn't go smoothly from point A to point B. Or let me say it this way, from point A to point Z. Point B and C and D may all be all over the place. I've said before that God doesn't understand geometry. In our mind, the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. In God's mind, that's not true. The shortest way for you to get from here to here is to go up here and then down here and then over here and then back up here, and then because he's got to do something in you before you get to that place or it'll destroy you. Okay, so we shouldn't be surprised when our journey has some difficulties, has some challenges. Just consider the fact that God is making your story better if you continue to trust him. Verses 5 and 6. Although Jesus was very fond of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days and made no move to go to them. Now that just puzzles me. He loves Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He cares for them very deeply. He considers them close friends. He hears that Lazarus is sick. And then it says, he stayed where he was for the next 2 days and made no move to go to them. Was he correct in doing this? Was he being led in doing this? Did he miss God by doing this? So God instructed him, I know you love them. I know you care for them. And it might be your inclination to get there immediately and solve this problem. But I'm telling you, and you're going to be disobedient if you don't do this, to wait where you are for 2 days. But God, that doesn't make sense.
I know.
That's crazy.
I know. I'm going through that right now.
This might be very relevant.
Yes, yes.
As a country, we're going through this right now.
Mm-hmm.
With our limited perspective and understanding of the big picture, we only focus on what makes the most sense to us and is the most comfortable to us, regardless of whether that's God's plan or not. And we somehow conclude that if it doesn't make sense to me, or if it's not comfortable to me, then it can't be God's plan, because God's plan is always sensible and comfortable. But where'd you get that verse? I want that verse. I've never read that verse. In fact, I've read verses that say the exact opposite of that. In this world, you shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. You shouldn't be surprised when difficulties come. In this case, the deadline came and went. Now, deadline here is a very interesting term because he ended up actually dead. Rather than our deadlines of, well, when this bill is due, and when this other thing is supposed to happen, and what's supposed to happen on this day. And well, you see, it's got to happen before this other day because that's just how it works, and there's no mechanism by which to fix it otherwise. Lazarus actually died. From our viewpoint, this was the end of the story. And yet, from God's viewpoint, it was not the end of the story. No story is ever over until God says it's over. I'll say that again. No story is ever over until God says it's over. Verse 8. The followers said, "But teacher, some people there tried to stone you to death only a short time ago. Now you want to go back there?" What would Jesus have done? How would this story have been different if he would have accepted this advice? Lazarus would still be dead.
Yeah.
Would the story be totally forever altered?
No.
Would we even be reading about it?
No.
It wouldn't be a good story. It wouldn't be in the book.
No.
It would raise more questions than it answers. So sometimes in your faith journey, there's going to be some people giving you advice, quote unquote advice, and you're going to have to make the decision. Okay, is that advice what God's saying to me or not? Is that advice part of God's story or not? Just because a good person, just because a well-meaning person, just because a person who's even got some spiritual maturity about them, just because they say something, and I'm not saying totally dismiss it if it doesn't fit your narrative, but I am saying make sure it matches what God is speaking to you about this particular story. Miracles are uncommon because most people are unwilling to do the uncommon things to have them. Miracles are uncommon because most people are unwilling to do the uncommon things to have them. In this particular case, the common thing, the common attitude was, Jesus, don't go back there. They try to kill you. Had he done that, they would have never seen the miracle. So it took an uncommon person, in this case Jesus, to do an uncommon thing, go back to the place where they tried to kill you to see a miracle performed. Uncommon things happen to people that are willing to do uncommon things. Nine and 10. Jesus replied, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight in every day? You can go through a day without the fear of stumbling when you walk in the one who gives light to the world. But you will stumble when the light is not in you, for you'll be walking in the dark." I'm going to read the middle part of this again. You can go through a day without fear of stumbling when you do what? When you walk in the one who gives light to the world. Does it say that you're not going to have night? Does it say there's going to be places where you can't see? But you can still be free of fear of stumbling because of the one in whose light you are walking. You can walk securely even through the dark place once you have light from him who gives light to the world, who is light to the world. On the other hand, you can stumble even in broad daylight if you don't have light about what to do en route to the end of your story. We want it always well lit. We want it always very, very clear, very, very obvious. And we don't get that luxury. We don't get that right. Again, think about the story. If there's no contradiction, if there's no issue, if there's no challenge, how good is the story? Is the challenge going to come as a representative of the light or representative of the darkness? So once you get your understanding, once you get clarity about what it is you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to get to the end of the journey, and then at that point, trust in the light of the one that gave you that answer, and not necessarily in whether the path you're walking in is well lit or dark. Because that light that's in you, that light that you heard, will ultimately conquer whatever darkness exists. (12 and 13). The disciples said, "Master, if he's gone to sleep, he'll get a good rest and wake up feeling fine." Jesus was talking about death, while his disciples thought he was talking about taking a nap. My question is this: are we spiritually astute enough to know the difference between someone or something who is dead or someone or something that's simply taking a nap? Before anything can change, Both groups, the one that's dead and the one that's taking a nap, have to wake up. The process of getting someone dead or the process of waking somebody up is different. And we've got to know the difference between whether they're actually dead and we have to raise this thing, or whether they're just taking a nap and they need to be stirred. Verse 15. Did you have something to say?
No.
Okay. I'm glad for your sakes that I wasn't there. You're about to be given new grounds for believing. Now let's go to him. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there. It will help you to believe, to trust, and rely on me. However, let us go to him. One more of these. And for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there, because now you have another opportunity to see who I am so that you will learn to trust in me. Come, let's go see him. So Jesus says, as a response to all this stuff, okay, now I know he's died. I heard the message. I made the decision. I was led by my Father to stay where I was for 2 more days. Now it's time to go. So we're going there, and we're going back to the place where they tried to kill me before, because I was told to do it. Okay, so we're going back here. He gets there and he goes, or he heads that direction, and he thinks, okay, there's going to be some people that are upset. There's going to be some people that are bent out of shape about the fact that he's dead at the moment. And Jesus' response to that situation is, for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. I am happy about the fact that he died. I am happy about the fact that I wasn't there to fix the problem on their deadline. Now, wait a minute, Jesus. That doesn't make sense. Are you touched with our infirmities or not? Do you feel like we do? I am. I'm completely aware of what you're feeling and what you're thinking. But I'm more concerned about your heart. I'm more concerned about your development of faith rather than your convenience or your comfort. Get this. Jesus was glad that he didn't meet the natural deadline because it required the disciples and Mary and Martha to utilize or grow their faith. How often does God not necessarily set up, but allow these challenges in our faith journey just to grow our faith? If it went smoothly, would our faith ever get a chance to grow? So sometimes these difficulties, these challenges are allowed by God for the point of our faith growing, our faith developing. Sure.
Okay, so do we know about the timeline that Jesus has spent with his disciples when this happened? Do we know?
You mean how many years he was with them?
Yes.
I haven't done that research. I don't know.
Secondly, is this the same Mary and Martha that where Mary was sitting at Jesus' feet and Martha was preparing?
That was one of those verses that I gave you. Yes.
Okay, this is the same.
The same one, right?
Okay,
Martha got all bent out of shape about who's going to take care of the food, and Mary was worshiping at Jesus' feet or listening to him, and Jesus, aren't you going to help me? Aren't you going to make her do this? Right. She's chosen the good part, and only one thing is needful. She's chosen it, and it won't be removed from, that same group.
Okay.
I don't know how long they were with him, but it was long enough for him to have gone to this area before and then try to stone him. Right. So it wasn't, they were just getting acquainted with each other. It was, it's John 11. I don't know how chronological the book of John is, but you get into like 14, 15, and 16, and he's at the Last Supper with them, giving them the final farewell speech. So,
well, the reason I asked for maybe a timeline on it is that, so when Jesus, when they were talking about when Jesus was referring to his sleep, and he was referring to death as where they were looking at it, well, he's asleep, he needs that sleep to recover. I just wondered if they were relatively new, if they have not spent much time to know what Jesus was meaning. This
was the first time that he ever, or first time in history that anybody went that long being dead.
Okay.
He'd raised Jairus' daughter, and I'm not sure Jairus' daughter was first, but that was just a few hours, if you want to say that, after she had actually died.
Right.
So they're still growing. They're still maturing.
Okay.
it doesn't really surprise me that they didn't pick up on what he's saying because they're interpreting it literally rather than listening with a spiritual.
Right.
But I don't really know how to answer the question.
I understand. Okay. But you can kind of see where that would be.
Yeah.
You know, how long have you spent with him?
To know,
To
right,
know.
that he's speaking in a different level than what you're talking about.
Right.
That's a good question, though. Jesus was glad he didn't meet the natural deadline because it required everybody to utilize or grow their faith. It's not nearly as hard to believe God if you're healed before you go back to the doctor the next time. Have you noticed that? It's not nearly as hard to believe God if you get the money well before the bill's due. It gets a little more challenging on the day of, or the day after, or the next day, or the next week to continue to believe God when it didn't work out like you thought it was supposed to.
Yeah, because when you get blessed before you're going to apply that blessing wherever it's needed, it's like
Awesome, praise God. You're looking out ahead of me, right?
And then when you're not getting answers, when you're asking him, I'm in this spot right now, and I'm not getting the answers I want right now, and this situation is just continually going, and yes, I know what you're saying. I'm not upset with it, or I'm just being as patient. I'm just waiting on it.
Right.
So,
right.
But I know what you're saying.
Would their faith have developed differently had Jesus gone and healed him immediately?
Right. Yeah, it would have been a whole different story.
Their faith might have been developed, but it would have been more along the lines of God's always going to meet my deadline. God's always going to meet my timeline. He's always going to make me comfortable in this process.
Right.
And that's not at all what God was trying to teach them in this moment. I'm not saying that God will always do this late stuff to give you an opportunity to grow, but I'm saying that he can do it that way on occasion to really test your faith. And we need to be aware of the possibility that he can do that. And whether it comes on time or not, it still doesn't change anything. You believe God, his word's still true. He's still obligated to perform it, so long as you continue to believe him and not let go of it in the midst of the process. Verse 19. And many of the Jewish leaders had come to pay their respects and to console Martha and Mary on their loss. We're so sorry about what's happened. Just accept this as God's will and move on. We know how much this hurts right now, but give it some time. You'll be okay. What if they would have adopted that attitude? What if they would have adopted that mentality? Would this have turned out differently? I say that it would have. Jesus is going to require their faith at some point in the future to see this thing change. And if they just accept it like it is, there's no faith pushing the situation in any different direction. But yet well-meaning people, again, try to come up to you and say, oh, it's okay. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry that this is the end of the story. And what are they really doing without knowing it? They're trying to get you to let go of anything that you claimed that is seemingly past the deadline. 21 through 22. Martha said to Jesus, "Sir, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. And even now it's not too late. For I know that God will bring my brother back to life if you will only ask him to." Okay, so let's break this up into two parts. There's really two different things going on here. Verse 21, "Sir, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died." She's trying to blame Jesus for Lazarus' death. Look, I had faith that you could come and heal him. But now that that opportunity has passed, I don't have faith anymore. So my faith was dependent upon you doing it by a certain time, by a certain station, by a certain status. My faith was not beyond. My faith was not bigger than that deadline. Trying to blame him. And then in the midst of her trying to blame him, before that conversation continues, I think she gets a glimpse of something in her spirit. And she just pops off. And even now, it's not too late. For I know that God will bring my brother back to life again if you will only ask him to. And I have a feeling it's one of those, whoa, where did that come from moments? Have you ever had those? You're in a situation, the more time you spend with God, hopefully those moments become more and more frequent. You're given some news about something. And before you even have time to really process this, well, God, if you'd have done this, it wouldn't be that way. But even now, blah, 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 blah. And you start to speak faith. You start to speak truth. You speak the possibility of what God can still do in the situation before you ever realize.
It's not internal. It's
correct. Correct. Yeah. And I can't help but think that she was surprised when she actually thought about what she said in verse 22. But even now, it's not too late. You can ask God and he'll give you whatever you want and he'll live. Whoa. Time out. Did I just say that? Time out. Where'd that come from? That's not what I understand. That's not what I comprehend. Where did that come from? It came from her spirit. Her spirit started talking. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. What's in your heart in abundance? When your barrel gets rattled like that, what's going to come out of you? Oh, God, it's just kind of the way that it is. It's my luck. Nothing bad ever happens. Nothing but bad ever happens to me. Or it doesn't matter what you just told me. Yes, I appreciate the information, but my God is bigger than what you just described. My God controls time in his hand. So what if your deadline has passed? My God can go beyond that deadline and still fix the situation. When we find ourselves in this place, often we will let our mind be in charge. And when our mind's in charge, what comes out of your mouth? It's your fault. If you would have done this, if you hadn't done this, if you would have done this on this day, I wouldn't be in this situation. Or are you going to let your spirit be in charge? But even now, whatever you ask, God is capable of doing it.
Yeah, what's in abundance in your heart will come out. You have faith in your heart. You can have faith about that situation or any situation. But when there's doubt in there, that's what's going to come out.
That's what's going to come out too.
And,
you're right.
Yeah,
you're right.
So, yeah.
Hopefully, the faith in your heart is in there in such abundance that whatever comes out of your mouth in that moment, it's faith-based, and it'll have the authority, it'll have the power to flip the script on your current situation and give God the possibility of changing something that even seems insurmountable and impossible. Okay, so Martha says, it's your fault. If you'd have been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But even now, whatever you ask for, God will do. Now, verse 23. Jesus told her, your brother will come back to life again. Yes, Martha said, when everyone else does on the resurrection day. Now, what's happening here? She caught a glimpse of something, and then she said it, and he goes, now, whoa, God, what did I just say? Whoa, where'd that come from? I don't get that. I don't understand that. I don't necessarily even believe that. I definitely haven't processed it. I don't get it. Now she's trying to back up. Now she's trying to backpedal back into her head to something that she does understand. She didn't understand it. She said something by faith and couldn't figure out how that could happen. And then, as we so often do, retreat back into the head where you are in control, where it does make sense, where there is a possibility, where there is a way in the natural. How many times do we do that same thing? The Holy Spirit drops something crazy in our hearts and we say it without thinking. Then we think about what we just said. Where'd that come from? That didn't happen. That can't happen. That isn't practical here. We go back to something more likely or more probable that always exists in the natural. Because that moment of faith, that moment of clarity, that moment of supernatural utterance scared us. Back into a place where you at least had the option of, all right, no, that's too far out there. I can't do that. Let's get back to something that I am aware of, back to something that I do control, back to something where I'm comfortable, where it makes sense, where it's logical. where it's been done before.
I appreciate what you said about fearing the supernatural. Because if there's supernatural that's faith-based, I mean, yeah, it's going to be, you're unfamiliar with it. And it could be fearful. Not, I don't know how to explain it, not in a scary, but it's
Right.
like, in a supernatural way.
Right.
There's fear of that because it's supernatural. You're not so embracing of the supernatural that you still fear. You have fear of it when it presents itself.
Absolutely. And that's where the battle is at. Am I going to believe this thing that I just caught a glimpse of, or am I not going to believe that?
I literally played out a deal. This is very dangerous for me to do, and it's something that I'm aware of that the Holy Spirit is working on me. I play out scenarios in my mind, especially with a friend of mine, and there's things being revealed. So anyways, I played out this scenario of an unbeliever where I'm a believer, and I just played out this thing of how I believe in the Bible as fact. He might see it as fiction.
Right.
Where some people believe in aliens as fact, or I see it as fiction.
Right.
And if I saw a supernatural event, I would see it as, as holy as if that's what it is, and a holy thing, as
Yes.
as God intended it to be. Versus, there's, I don't know. It's just. I don't know where I was going with that.
That's okay.
But it was just, talking about the fear of the supernatural. I don't know. It's just weird to me that I see things where I see this is fact now.
You've come a long ways. It's awesome to watch.
Yeah.
So Jesus said, he catches her in that moment. Whatever you say, you can do. God will do whatever you ask for him. Jesus says, your brother will come back to life again. He's trying to continue this faith statement that she just started. He's trying to get her to agree with this. And now she starts backpedaling. Yes, Martha said, when everyone else does on the resurrection day. That normal pattern, that normal expectation.
That's what my point was, is that I was going back to believing in the supernatural thing. Yeah, I might want to backpedal and try to make sense of it in my mind. That's where I was going.
Right.
With
right. And when we do, we shut off the supernatural.
Right. And yeah, we deny ourselves something that we could really just give glory to God over.
Absolutely. So Jesus is still dealing with her about the situation. 25, 26. You don't have to wait for the end. Now, she tried to backpedal. I know he'll live again at the resurrection, the last day. One day he'll live again. I know that. But you don't have to wait for the end. I am right now resurrection and life. Right now, I am. I'm standing in front of you, and I hold resurrection and life within me. The one who believes in me, even though he or she dies, will live. And everyone who lives believing in me does not ultimately die at all. Do you believe this? Okay, I am right now. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's always present tense. It's always now. Now it's always substance. It's going to happen one day. It is now. Faith is now. Never future tense. Well, one day in the future, I'm going to have this, or this is going to happen to me. That's still hope. That's not faith. Because it's future tense rather than present tense. There have been millions of believers who have died since Jesus spoke these words. Was he wrong? There have been millions of believers who died since Jesus spoke these words. Was he wrong? He was not wrong. So what's messed up here? Our concept of death is so selfish. We define death as the person being absent from us. The reality is the person is so much better off by being present with the Lord. From their perspective, death of the physical body was the doorway into true life. Jesus called himself resurrection and life. Have you ever thought about the fact that the author of life allowed himself to be killed and then demonstrating the claim by rewriting the end of that story with both resurrection and life? I find that very cool, very reassuring. Okay, 29. She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I have believed and continue to believe that you are the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed, the Son of God, he who was destined and promised to come into the world, and it is for you that the world has waited." So Martha makes this bold statement of faith, and then she tries to retreat. And Jesus says, "No, you're right. Keep going. Yes, that's it." And her dialogue is, "Okay, I can't believe that. I can't go there. I can't say that. But I know he will live again someday. Not necessarily today. One day he will live again and live forever at that point." And then in this verse, I don't understand what you just said. It's above me. I don't get that yet. But I do believe this. You in the present right now are the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one. Martha goes and quietly gets Mary. The crowd sees Mary leave quickly, follows, assuming that she's going to the tomb to weep. Mary meets Jesus, starts the conversation with blaming, just like Martha did. "Jesus, where were you? You could have kept this from happening." 33 through 35. When Jesus saw her sobbing, and the Jews who had come with her also sobbing, he was deeply moved in spirit, to the point of anger at the sorrow caused by death, and was troubled, and said, "Where have you laid him?" They said, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. We have a high priest who is touched with the feelings of our weaknesses. The last enemy that God will destroy is death. That enemy, death, comes to steal, kill, and destroy. God is not at all happy with death or anything associated with it. Why did this death, even though he knew it was temporary, why did this death bother Jesus?
Because he loved Lazarus.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's messing up his people. It's bringing destruction. It's bringing hurt. It's stealing. It's tearing. It's destroying their current family, their current situations. Absolutely. Even though Jesus felt the emotions of that situation, he did not let those feelings dictate what would or would not happen next. And so often we miss it right there. Our emotions get involved and we derail whatever we're trying to work on because the emotions are so strong. Am I saying don't have emotions? I'm not saying that. I'm saying God made you emotional. Experience the emotions, but do not let those emotions dictate what you do or don't do next. If Jesus had stayed in this wet, weeping situation, what do you think he would have done? Wrap your arms around him and hug him. It'll be okay. And then probably leave. So he had to get back in control of his emotions. 36, 37. And the Jews said, "Look, he loved Lazarus very much." Now he's weeping. "Look, he loved Lazarus very much." But some of them said, "Jesus healed the eyes of the blind man. Why didn't he help Lazarus and stop him from dying? If God is so good, why didn't he fix the problem the way he should have or when he should have?" You ever heard that story? Well, if this God that you serve is so good, why couldn't he pay that bill on time? And if this God you serve is so good and powerful and big, why didn't he do this according to our schedule, according to our timeline, according to our situation, according to our perspective? Why didn't this case result in a miracle? That's kind of funny. Looking at what is about to happen, and they're saying, why didn't this particular case result in a miracle? Again, don't read this as if you already know how the story ends. Be present in the moment with them. You don't know that the miracle is coming. So you're right in the middle of it. Okay, God, I don't know what you're doing here, but okay. I'm going to step with you. I'm going to stay in step with you as we go through this. 38. So Jesus, again, deeply moved within to the point of anger, approached the tomb. It was a cave, and a boulder was laying against it to cover the entrance. Now Jesus, again, sighing repeatedly and deeply disquieted, approached the tomb. It was a cave, a hole in the rock, and a boulder lay against the entrance to close it. What is this Jesus is feeling from the environment here? Remember, these are professional mourners. These are people that were hired just to grieve. and supposedly make the family feel better. I don't know how that works. I don't know how adding more grief to the situation will help the family members feel better, but whatever. So these guys are professional mourners, and they're just boo-hooing and carrying on. And it even gets to the place where it affects Jesus to a certain point. He sees part of this, but he's smart enough to realize, okay, if I stay there, if I let that dominate this situation, what God wants to do is not going to be accomplished. It seems like he's having to get himself under control, that he's having to regroup, that he's having to, okay, pause, stop. We would call it a timeout. Jesus is having to take a timeout here from the emotions of that situation to get back to where his spirit is in charge. Jesus tells the people to remove the stone. Notice this. Jesus won't roll away the stone for you. He's usually going to require you to roll your stone away. Now, Lazarus couldn't roll his stone away, so he had somebody else do it. But most of the time, he will require you or somebody else to roll the stone away for you before you do a miracle, before you see a miracle. Martha wants to make sure that Jesus knows the body will stink by now. Lord, you don't really want to go back there. That's nasty. That's bad. It's going to smell bad. You don't really want to mess with this. And yet he persists. Have we ever done that? God, you don't really want to deal with that because that's just going to be bad. That's just going to be nasty. Did it faze him? Did it deter him? He's okay with your mess. He's okay with your stink. He's okay with whatever is going on behind that stone. All the death, all the hurt, all the pain, all the things encapsulated and epitomized by that stone and what's behind it. He's okay with that. So long as you're okay with opening the stone to let him have access to it. Verse 40. Then Jesus said to her, remember what I told you. I said that if you believed, you would see God's divine greatness. Jesus, don't do it. It's going to stink. It's going to be bad. What's she doing here? She's coming out of the faith that she just expressed. So what's Jesus got to do? Look, we talked about this. We just said, if you believe, you're going to see some things. And you said you believed in at least me as the anointed one. So that hasn't changed. Nothing is different now than when we talked 10 minutes ago or however long it was. Nothing's changed. I'm doing what you said you believed. Are you going to let me finish? Are you going to let me go forward? Are you going to let me go ahead and do this? We are acting out what you just said you believed. Let me finish. And somehow she had to give consent to continue. What if she hadn't given that consent? What if she'd have made a big fuss? No, you're not opening that stone. Would he have done it anyway? Nope. Her faith wasn't in it didn't allow him to do it. So often God doesn't get involved in our messes because we won't allow him to get involved in our messes. We don't approach that situation as something that he can fix, wants to fix, or has the ability to fix, and we're certainly not going to help him do it. This is an important point. She gave consent to continue, and Jesus would not have been able to continue had she not given that consent. Okay, 41, 42. Then to the others, go ahead, take away the stone. They removed the stone. Jesus raised his eyes to heaven and prayed, Father, I'm grateful that you have listened to me. Think about that. You have listened to me. Jesus hadn't said anything yet. He hadn't prayed yet. What do you mean? You have already listened to me. It was back 3 days ago when Jesus said, Lazarus is going to live again. The glory of God is going to be seen in this situation. Let us go to him. Let us be with him, because now you're going to get to see things. Your faith is going to get to grow. It was all that past stuff that he said that already had this in place, that already had it done. And it was then where God heard him. It wasn't necessarily this prayer. Now, he did not hear this prayer, but this prayer wasn't for the thing to take place. This prayer was, when he says it later here, This prayer was for the people around to see what was going on. I'm grateful that you have listened to me already. It's already been accomplished. The best way for Jesus to regain control of himself was to look up and start thanking God. And I will say to you, that's the best thing that you can do to get yourself under control. Look up and start thanking God. Lord, I thank you that you are good, that you are big, that you are my God, that you are the creator, that you are the healer, that you are whatever you are. And you're that to me. That'll get your emotions under control. That'll get you back in the right place to move forward spiritually. Jesus was thankful that God had already listened to him. Go back to the beginning of the story. The sickness will not end in death. Go back to the discussion with Martha. Jesus had already declared what would happen twice with Martha. Even if the legal requirement for words of faith had already been fulfilled, those standing there wouldn't know it. So it would look odd for Jesus to just go up to the tomb and wave his hands or whatever, and Lazarus come out of the tomb. So just for the benefit of those that are there, he prays again. So often when God sets up a situation for a miracle, he does it in such a way that there's no chance for anyone other than God to get the glory for it. If you or anyone else can still fix your situation, you aren't yet ready for a miracle. Because you could do it. Because you could fix it. And who gets the credit for it in that situation? Well, this thing just happened to happen at the right time. No, God will set it up so that the only thing that could be done is him showing up. 43:44. Then with a loud voice, Jesus shouted with authority, Lazarus, come out of the tomb. Then in front of everyone, Lazarus, who had died 4 days earlier, slowly hobbled out. He still had grave clothes tightly wrapped around his hands and feet and covering his face. Jesus said to them, unwrap him and let him loose. Notice that Lazarus is now out of the tomb, but he's still bound. Sometimes we need others to help us get free even after the miracle. That song that we do, I stepped out of the grave. It's a happy song. It's a good song. But the thing that I guess bugs me about that song is Lazarus also came out of the grave and he was still bound. So yes, thrilled about the fact that I'm out of the grave, but we don't realize that's not the end of the story. I'm still bound. Have you thought about how he's bound? I mean, mummified, wrapping all around him. So how does he get out of the tomb? He has to like hop.
Yeah.
He can't just walk normally. He has to hop. So there's still a limitation to him, even though he's out of the tomb, even though he's out of the grave, even though we've had the miracle, there's still a limitation that needs to be resolved. After your miracle, it's entirely possible that somebody else is still going to have to do something to help you get totally free. You're about to have to change something to stay free. You're about to have to do something differently that might have allowed you to be in that situation in the first place so that you don't return to that situation, even after your miracle. Now, how is all this about healing? If Jesus hadn't healed him or whatever sickness he had, Lazarus would have quickly died again. In just a matter of moments, Jesus called life back into his body. He reversed whatever decomposition had already occurred. He healed him of the original sickness and gave him back alive and well to his family. Now that's a good ending to the story. Once again, the story is not done until God says it's done. All he needs is someone willing to believe beyond the normal course of events. Needs might not be strong enough. God requires somebody to believe beyond the normal course of events to see the miraculous. He requires someone to believe for an alternate ending, and that somebody must be willing to stay with it in spite of those who say you should just quit and accept what has happened. Are you that person? Are you the one who will be willing to stay with it past the deadline, past the natural course of events, past the state at which it becomes impossible, past the point at which we're at the tomb, we're about to roll away the rock, and it's going to get smelly, and it's going to get nasty, and it's going to get dirty real quick? Are you willing to go through that? If so, you're entitled to the miracle. And otherwise, God might have to find somebody else. It's never over until God says it's over, or until you quit, whichever comes first.